Hello, everyone. My name is KP. I'm part of the SIFPAC support team, and welcome to day one of the 2025 Supplier Development Summit that is being hosted by the Good Food Purchasing Initiative team, which we call the GFPI team for short. Together with our partners, we are working to make Chicagoland's food system more equitable and transparent, centered on food that is local, sustainable, fair, humane, and nutritious. This means shifting how institutions buy food through the Good Food Purchasing Program, while also uplifting suppliers with resources and gatherings such as the summit that we're all attending. So thank you for joining Accessing Wholesale and Institutional Markets, Compliance and Food Safety Considerations, featuring McKenna Hayes, who of Food Connects, who is the Director of Strategic Impact. And McKenna, I'll pass it on to you to get us started.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Happy to have you here and excited to talk about compliance for wholesale markets. It really excites me. So I was really grateful to be invited to come talk about some of this stuff. So, got a little slideshow going here. It is not fancy. It's just some bullet points that we're going to talk through. So, be prepared for that. And it'd be really great if folks felt open to that. Oh, I see we already did that. Yeah. So you could enter your name, org, and location in the chat. And if you felt open to sharing, maybe if you're a buyer or a food hub or a food vendor or a technical assistance provider, just like a broad term of what the work you're doing is, because I do like to keep an eye on that. And if everyone in this calls a food hub, we'll talk food hub. If everyone's a farmer, we'll talk farmers, or just kind of trying to like broaden the stuff I'm talking about to the audience a little bit. So that's really helpful for me if you feel open to sharing any of that. And we will also have about 10 minutes at the end for questions. And also, please feel free to drop some questions in the chat as we go. I do have the chat open, and if it's a fitting moment and we have time, we'll try to also talk in real time. This is a pretty small group, so I'm totally open to having more of a conversation about questions that come up in real time versus me just like talking to you off a PowerPoint for the next hour. Um, so yeah. Um, so my name is McKenna. This is my formal bio that I have had to write recently. So you can read that whole thing if you want. But really short version is I have been a food hub operator for over 10 years and working in food systems for around 20 years. The food hub I work at now is a wholesale distribution and aggregation food hub. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. And then, as part of my journey, I have become really well versed in compliance, food safety regulations for food hubs, for wholesale markets, and for institutional markets, and really have learned a lot over the years of how those things all fit together or don't sometimes, and some of the things to have in mind as you are starting to access the wholesale markets or just larger. Even if you're already selling wholesale, there's also different tiers within wholesale of different size markets and things like that. Um, okay. So I'll move on from that. So Food Connects, a little really brief intro about Food Connects. I'm located in southern Vermont. And Food Connects is a nonprofit organization. It's we do a lot of work in the Northeast region and especially in Vermont. These are just some photos of the work we do. We have three main programs. One is a wholesale aggregation distribution food hub. So is really our biggest program that's been around for about 10 years. We also do in-school, farm-to-school programming. We've been doing that for about 15 years, really paved the way for the food hub to exist. So selling to institutions and farm-to-school has really been a huge pillar of the development of our food hub, which is going to help with what we're talking about a little bit. And then the third batch of services that we offer is technical assistance, which is part of why I'm here talking today. We do a lot of technical assistance to other food hubs around their regulatory compliance and scaling up to wholesale markets. And then we also do a lot of technical assistance to food vendors. So growers, value added, whatever category of food you're producing, we do a lot of TA around that to smaller food vendors that are working to enter the wholesale market. So a lot of times distributors, they're not even going to talk to a smaller vendor who hasn't sold wholesale before. We'll spend a lot of time with that vendor, working with them on, a lot around compliance. We're not writing food safety plans for produce growers. We're not doing that deep of technical assistance, but a lot of work around like understanding what wholesale means and pricing and packaging and labeling and a lot of things like that. So that's part of our technical assistance. And really, though, all the three programs, they all work together and really build and grow off of each other. We'll talk a little bit more about the food hub. So these are just some more pictures of the food hub, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this right now. If there's time at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the experiences at our food hub as we've grown over the years. But what we're really here to talk about is accessing wholesale and institutional markets with a real focus on compliance and food safety. So I know there's been some other sessions through this conference about wholesaling and institutional markets. And I just want to name that compliance and food safety, while it can kind of define a lot of the other things, it's not the only thing that changes when you are entering into conversations with wholesale customers and institutional markets. So I already mentioned there's lots of stuff around pricing tiers and packaging and labeling and case packs and product quality and supply chain. Like there's a lot of different things to talk about and decisions to make as you're considering a wholesale market. This little slice that we're focusing on for the next 50 minutes is specifically about compliance and food safety. So the way I like to think about it is that compliance really equals market access. When you start talking to larger customers, they're going to ask you about compliance and food safety stuff. They have to, because they also have their own regulations and insurance policies and vendor agreements and lots of different things that they, as a larger customer, have to verify within their supply chain. So I'm going to lump food growers and food hubs together for now. I'm going to split that out a little bit later in some conversations, but really, like, if you are starting, especially institutional markets, and when I say institutional, I'm talking about higher education, um, bigger colleges, hospitals, larger institutional markets. K through 12 can also be considered institutional. Sometimes those supervisory unions or school systems will also have much stricter compliance and food safety requirements, but typically you really start to see these questions when you're starting to engage with larger customers, universities, hospitals, large wholesalers, large retailer accounts, and larger distributors. If you are a grower or food producer that is going to on board with a distributor, that's also another way to access a wholesale market. And that larger distributor is probably going to ask you some questions about your compliance programming as part of your onboarding. So as you are starting to make that shift from a direct to consumer market to a wholesale slash institutional market, you are really stepping into a different regulatory environment. And that's a choice to make. Like, you don't have to do it, right? Like, sometimes we're working with vendors who are like, yeah, I want to sell through Food Connects. I want to access wholesale markets. And we're like, okay, well, this is what that means for you. We've got to get this, and this. We need a food safety plan, a recall plan, some of this stuff. And they're like, you know what? Actually, I don't really want to do this. I'm happy with my CSA and my farmers market, and that's great. And it's like really knowing your business and what you are willing to change about operations and some of your systems. And it's like it's cool. Like, we're here to support what the food vendor wants to do. And so that's just something to really think about. So your typical direct to consumer markets, right? Those are your CSAs. Those are your farm stands. Those are your, you want to think about it as you, as the food vendor, are selling right to the end consumer. That is selling to the market. And that can also happen with distributors. There's a lot of food hubs that are doing direct to consumer CSA models or charitable food giving models. And those tend to have less regulatory. I mean, you should still be thinking about risk mitigation and safety within your food system operations, but there does tend to be less hard and fast regulatory contracts and vendor onboarding things in a direct to consumer market. And that's really because like you're engaging directly with the person eating the food. There's a lot less risk, there's less hands in between, there's less steps. Um, when you start getting into those larger markets, there is inherently more risk presented because though there are more people accessing that food. Um, so you're thinking about risk mitigation, you're thinking about the safety of the product, a lot of verification of systems. So often what I see with folks that are making that step from direct to consumer into more formal wholesaling is oftentimes people already have a lot of stuff in place, like they're already doing the things, but they don't have the logs or the written programs. So often you're just going to have to sit down and write a bunch of SOPs, create some logs on systems that you already have in place. And that language is typically just around so those things verify your systems. Those are the things that someone onboarding you as a vendor is going to say, hey, I got to see like your table of contents of SOPs, and they're going to verify that these things exist. Um, and like I mentioned here, larger wholesale institutional customers, they often have their own sets of regulatory requirements that they have to be in compliance with, and that trickles down to you. And we're going to talk a little bit about FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, on a further slide. But as a distributor or a grower or a food vendor, you may, your own operation, be exempt from certain regulations due to your size. But if the wholesale or institutional customer that you are selling to is not exempt, it doesn't matter that you are, they still need to see all these things from you. So there can often be like a little bit of a tiered approach. Like maybe the federal regulation says this, but you want to work with a customer that requires this. So you'll need to meet the stricter customer requirements. And that's all just information that you're gathering as you start to engage with these markets. Um, and oh, that's the next slide. Perfect. Understanding your market. So wholesale versus institutional versus retail. They're not all the same thing. And the nuances can be, it can be nuanced, the difference between them. But, and there's different sizes within each of those markets. So I have seen um, that institutional markets often have the most, I'd say, strict onboarding protocols, especially starting out early on. Like sometimes to onboard with an institutional customer, you can't even start the process unless you can check the boxes of their approved vendor onboarding program. Wholesaling and retail is definitely can be more tiered. I think you can often start selling to some of these customers as you are working on things. They might have a little more flexibility. And then especially like wholesale, especially can have different sizes. Like you might be wholesaling to your local co-op and they're buying a case or two of things. And then you can also think of wholesaling as selling pallets to a large distribution center that is then sending those pallets out to individual stores. So there's a whole spectrum of growth and scaling, even within the wholesale, institutional, and retail markets. Um, and that can be pretty hard to understand at first. And my biggest piece of advice, and it's right here in the slide, is when you start engaging in wholesale in this conversation with larger customers, just ask really early on what their requirements are to be an approved vendor. We've had experiences over the years where, we even were like, launched a new delivery route for a customer that we were really excited to work with. And we were like doing all this sourcing and talking about pricing and all this stuff. And then way late in the process, they handed us the contract of what it actually meant to be an approved vendor with them. And we didn't have everything in place. And it took us like, 6 months or so to get some of the stuff they were requiring done. And I just, it's the kind of thing where like, I wish we had just asked that in the beginning because we could have been working on it the whole time. And so just, I just encourage that, like right away, just ask them what the requirements are. Maybe you can meet them right away and maybe you can't. And that's also a good thing for that customer to know. Um, like, what does their procurement team require? What specific documents do they need? There's a lot of like regulatory acronyms that float around food safety and compliance. And just ask more specifically, what do you mean by that? Okay, you need an audit. Like, what does it actually mean? Sometimes the person who's sending you that list might not actually know those details, and they have a checklist that their policy requires, and you, by asking for more details, can show that you're really trying to understand and you want to work with them on this. Some customers don't have a choice. Like, if you do not have the things on that list, even if you have the most engaged, enthusiastic, supportive buyer on their team, they cannot buy from you. Sometimes there is wiggle room, and I really encourage you to explore that. Like, we've had that experience that sometimes there can be an on ramp where we're like, okay, great, like we can onboard you, but you have to have this done in 3 months. We have to have 3 months of records on this new system, blah, 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 stuff like that. So there is room for engagement around that depending on the customers. Again, sometimes they're just going to be like, no, I literally can't. Like, we cannot onboard you unless you can meet all these requirements. And you say, okay, great. We can do it in 6 months. We can do it in a year. We got to work with a consultant on that. There's lots of different things that can come up. So just ask early and often what their requirements are. And then you can align your compliance work accordingly. Um, Sometimes it can be really helpful if maybe you don't have a lot of systems in place yet, and you know that in the future you really want to work with your local university or your local hospital or something like that. You can look at what they require and work backwards from that and develop your systems accordingly. There are different things that different customers will require, but they're essentially all based on the same regulations. So maybe you need to tweak something here or there for different customers, but usually if you can onboard with one large customer, you're going to be able to onboard with all of them. So working backwards from one big list will help you in other conversations with other wholesale and institutional accounts. Um, but definitely have it on mind to ask. I mean, of course, I do compliance work, so I'm always thinking about it and really interested in it. But I often don't find that it comes up like almost ever early enough in conversations. I think we're starting to have that conversation a little earlier in the process now. But it's like, it's not the sexy thing people want to talk about. They want to talk about pricing and they want to have back about supply and source identification and marketing and all that stuff. But it's like, what do you require? Like, what type of insurance do you need? Like what do I need to show you to even do that, to even start having those more exciting conversations? So
I
what
want to,
buyers look for.
sorry, I
Oh, go
wanted to
ahead.
just add one thing from the chat. Carla asked specifically about HACCP plans, which,
Yeah.
in my experience, it seems like that's a very specific thing that, like, yeah, what's your experience with specifically HACCP plans?
Yeah, it depends. And as a distributor, we are required to have a HACCP plan. Um, HACCP plan trainings are definitely more oriented for manufacturing and processing. But I am seeing it is more common for a HACCP plan to be required in general for again, it depends on the customer. There's lots of customers that don't require a HACCP plan. Um, And yeah, if you're talking to someone that needs HACCP planning, if you have questions about that, like let me know. We're working with a lot of people on HACCP plans right now. We've done a lot of work on our own HACCP plan. Um, and it's kind of like a lot of third-party audits, which we're going to talk about, are based on the premise of HACCP plan, which is essentially like preventative controls of hazards within your supply chain. and that can be really different for different parties depending on what your operation is like and what activities you engage in. So for Food Connect specifically, our HACCP plan, because we are not directly touching products, is pretty much all about temperature control and cold chain. And our critical control points are all about temperature control and verifying our logs and records and our temperature control equipment and things like that. If you are processing food, you're going to have a much different HACCP plan than we are, but the premise for those is very similar. When I was speaking earlier about one of those contracts about they handed us this list and we realized we couldn't do everything, the thing on that list actually was a HACCP plan that we had to dig in and write and have since refined over the years as we've learned more about it. So it is out there. It is a thing, but it's totally doable. There is not one master list to rule them all that applies to all large institutional and wholesale customers. I wish there was, but there is not. And that's partly because they're also different in what their requirements are, but also we're also different, right? Like there's not one list that all food hubs have to do to access these markets. There's not one whole list that all food producers have to make because it really depends on like what kind of food hub are you? What actions are you engaging in? What kind of food are you producing? Are you grower? Are you processor? Is it frozen? Is it fresh? Like there's all sorts of different variables that come together to define your regulatory framework and the customer's regulatory framework. So we can get closer, right, as we get more specifics about who we're trying to sell to, and we align that with what our actions and variables are. We can zero in much more closely on, okay, like this is the specific list of things that apply. But some common requirements across the board that I've listed here. We've got facility licenses and registration. So if you're processing or a food hub, often you have to have an FDA registration number. That is a very common thing that a large customer is going to ask for. It basically is just saying like, yeah, the FDA knows we exist and we're registered as a food facility. Proof of food safety plans and systems. That can look like a lot of different things depending on your operation. A HACCP plan is one of those. A good manufacturing practices plan is one of those. A food safety plan is one of those. Trainings can be part of that. I always like to point out, I think often in food safety compliance conversations, the term food safety plan is like really zeroed in on really quickly, but try to keep that a broader lens because really your food safety plan is just one part of your overall compliance program. There's other things that are a part of your compliance program, your licenses, your permits, your staff training. Your food safety plan is a big part of it, but it's not the only thing. And your onboarding list when you're engaging with these larger customers will often have a food safety plan as just one part of the list. Third-party audits, we got a slide about that a little bit later on. That is one way to verify your food safety systems. Some larger customers are going to require a third-party audit. Some do not. Some will just require verification that you have systems in place. So there's like a big spectrum of food safety plan all the way to a third-party audit, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Insurance is a very common thing. This webinar is not about insurance, but I highly recommend that you have liability insurance no matter what you're doing, if you're selling food or transporting food. But quite often those larger customers are going to have their own insurance requirements that you need to meet. Might require higher liability than maybe you have just for your operation. And often it's going to require that they are a additionally insured party on your insurance plan. So, insurance can get, this is all technical. I think insurance can get really technical. So often I will just literally ask like, what do you want for insurance if they're not being clear about it, and then you can just send those exact bullet points to your insurance company, and they'll send you back what you need. um, Traceability is critical. Again, this is one of those things where, like, if you are starting to engage in wholesale markets and larger customers, you should have traceability. It's really important for risk mitigation and safety within the supply chain. And we, as smaller, I'm assuming, like, we're engaging in this, maybe we're scaling up and we're smaller. We also don't want to be introducing more risk into these larger supply chains. So traceability recall plans are really important. When you think about a recall plan, you think about, can I, within 2 hours, see where all this food went one step forward and where it came from one step back? And there's lots of different ways to write recall plans. There's lots of templates. There's lots of support. Email me if you need help with a recall plan. And then mock recalls are actually also often required. Usually language is that you're required to have 2 mock recalls a year, and you have records of that. You finished it within 2 hours. And it's a really good thing to do. Like, testing your recall plan is really smart, because you don't want to be in the middle of a recall and realize that that thing you wrote in your recall plan isn't actually how that works in your system, and that you are figuring that out in real time. This isn't trying to be scary about recall plans. It's just, it is important. It's safe. And sometimes these larger customers are like taking a chance on us, on the small person, bringing them in. And like, this is that point I made earlier, that it equals credibility, right? So if something happens, you got to be able to credibly manage some of these programs, or these larger customers might just be like, I don't have time. Like, we're doing this thing. I don't have time for this. And then verified supply chain was the last thing on that list. So that is also can be called lots of different things. But essentially, you're verifying your supply chain. So if you are a food hub or another distributor, it means, what are you requiring from the people whose food you're selling? So, like, in terms of Food Connects, we have a whole vendor onboarding program that verifies our supply chain. We don't require third-party audits from everyone whose food that we sell. It's great if they have one. It makes it a little bit easier, but we don't want that to be this huge barrier. But we do require, like, proof of food safety plan, so that and lots of flexibility around what that can look like. If you're a food maker, your verified supply program would include information about where your ingredients are coming from, how you're doing lot numbers, how you're verifying the ingredients that you're using in your program, and kind of just like keeping track of where things are coming from, right? Because yeah, like, all that adds up. Like, if you aren't verifying that the food that you're onboarding and selling to this large customer is also safe, then you can be introducing risk into this bigger supply chain. Um, and I actually see this bullet, this verified supply chain, as a bigger gap often, as food hubs start to scale up. They've often just been like starting from a farmer co-op, or starting like with like really, really small, and then they don't have some of the stuff from the vendors that they're working with. And it can be kind of painful to have to backtrack and retroactively onboard all of the vendors that you have. And that can be something, if you have questions about that, I do lots of trainings about vendor onboarding and supply chain programs. And Carla, I see you have a question. Is that the question in the chat? And you're muted.
Muted. That's basically the question in the chat. And
Okay.
add on to that is that if you are putting your product, or if your goal is to put your product in a regional grocer, the steps that you are outlining here are really prudent for any food product.
Yeah,
You advise, yeah, regardless of who you're selling to,
Yeah, it's totally true. And that's kind of the thing about compliance, is like, it kind of makes sense. Like
It kind of makes
there's
sense.
can be yeah, like there's our tiers, and I do think there can often be like third-party audits being required of people that it is so it is not a fit to make this small vendor do this huge audit because they can
Sure.
verify their safety in other ways.
I hear
And
you.
your question here about the cost. So the cost of
Yep.
executing a mock recall doesn't need to cost that much. It's like it really just costs your staff time of writing your recall plan and doing the mock
Okay.
recall. It doesn't have to be like a big, huge cost, but
Okay.
that is a really good question in terms of cost, and something for you to consider. Like all of these things together can cost a lot of money,
Costs a lot of
especially if
money.
they, yeah, especially if they are getting into the land of third-party audits. And that's just a question for you to ask yourself. Like, do I want to invest this money developing these programs that might be above and beyond what is actually federally required of me? Sometimes
Right.
the answer is yes. Sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it can really suck if you do all this work for a large customer and they don't end up buying very much from you.
Don't buy from you.
Yeah. And I have heard of that happening, of people doing all this hard work for audits and then the customer doesn't actually end up buying that much. So that's just something for you to consider in your engagement with the customer. How enthused are they? How engaged are they? How involved? Like, and it's just
You really
it's
need a
again,
backup
it's like,
customer. You
yeah,
need
and it's,
backup in him in case that one falls through. Spin on
right. And that's what I was saying earlier of often getting this stuff in place is important no matter what customer you're selling to as you start to engage in the wholesale market, especially the baseline things, especially the stuff that's just getting you into baseline compliance with the regulations that apply to your operation. It's like we should do some of this stuff for safety, but there is, like I was talking about the spectrum, like there is some stuff where, it's going to cost a lot of money to get the exact thing that this customer requires. And you just look at that closely, make sure it's worth it. I think larger customers are often a little more squirrely about signing contracts, about pre-purchasing and like stuff like that. So you can ask that question though. It does happen. Um, that they will sign some sort of agreement or pre-purchasing type of contract that you can really depend on when you're doing these investments. It's definitely worth asking. I have heard it happen. I have also heard lots of no's around that. Um, so understanding your regulatory framework. So we just touched on this a little bit, is that regardless of who the customer is, what the questions are, your own operation does fall within this regulatory framework of different laws, requirements, things that apply to your operation. And it can be really confusing, especially if you're a food hub, especially if you're a food hub. I don't know if there's any food hubs on the call, but about what applies to you, what level of that regulation applies to you, um, and how. So some just like these each of these bullet points are their own training that I sometimes do with people. So we're doing like really broad strokes here. Um, so like I mentioned, food safety is just one chapter of your whole compliance program. Um, Depending on your operation, you might be regulated specifically by the FDA or by the USDA. FDA oversees most food products, produce, processed food, seafood. USDA typically is more the land of meat processing, eggs, poultry. Um, and some products fall under both, and some operations are going to fall under both. Again, especially if you're a food hub, especially if you're doing or food hub or distributor, and you're doing like a full range of products in your catalog offerings. And then some products fall under both, depending on what the composition of that product is and how you're processing it. Some products that have a certain percentage of meat in the product are an FDA and a USDA regulated product. It's just good questions to ask and things to be aware of as you start to have these conversations. And then if you are one of the operations that is regulated by the FDA, the biggest regulation to be aware of for your operation is called is FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. And the question about how FSMA regulates you really depends on whether you are considered a farm or you are considered a facility under that regulation. And then FSMA kind of has like two buckets. There's a produce safety rule, which regulates farms. And then there's the preventative controls rule that regulates food facilities, processors. You'd think it'd be easy, like, am I a farmer? Am I a facility? It can be really nuanced, actually, again, especially if you're a food hub. I think a lot of food hubs, as food hubs have changed and developed over the last 10 years, many food hubs are now regulated under the preventative controls rule, unless you are a farming heavy food hub. So it's just something to consider. There's a lot of really awesome FSMA flowcharts out there that will help you navigate where you fall in this regulation. And I really encourage you, if you are someone, if you're a food hub operator, if you're a grower, if you're a food producer, and you can't answer this question of what is your FSMA status, I really encourage you to start there. And you can contact me. I can help you with this. But it's like, yeah, what's your FSMA status? How are you regulated under FSMA? Because whether you are PSR, Produce Safety Rule, or PCR, Preventative Controls Rule, really gives you a starting place to understand like what the regulations even are. And then under both of those parts of the regulation, there's different tiers, right? According to your size and your sales. So you might be exempt, you might be qualified exempt, you might be fully regulated. There's other designations as well versus like retail sales and wholesaling. And there's a lot of nuance about how to understand your FSMA status. But it's a really important place to start as you are starting to engage with your regulatory framework. And we could talk a lot about that. I'm going to keep going because we're already getting close to time, which is crazy. But okay. Again, another thing to understand is the framework and interplay of federal, state, and municipal, especially licenses and permits. And there are state-specific regulations too, depending on where you are. So lots of different licenses can be required depending on what activities your operation engages in, and that can also vary by state and product type. Which department you're going to be working with in your state definitely varies with who has been designated with regulatory authority for that state. Often it's going to be your health department or your agricultural, whatever the ag agency is called in your state. There's other agencies that get involved, but often it's one of those two that will be able to help you. And then there's specialized programs that might activate depending, again, like what activities are you engaging in. So if you are having meat products, dairy products, egg products, that's going to weave in a few other things to think about. And then organic, of course, if you are producing an organic certified food, there's USDA organic regulations. And actually, even as a distributor, this is kind of new. It's been around for like a year. The regulations changed last year. Most distributors lost the exemptions. So if you are a distributor and you are selling certified organic produce and you're not certified organic, you're supposed to be, and contact me and I can help you with that. Because if you aren't certified organic as a distributor now, you could lose the people whose food you're selling, they could lose their organic certificate. They won't lose their certification, but the product they're selling through you technically could lose its certification. So it's just something like, as we support the food vendors, we want to make sure we're providing the right channels for some of their products to go through. So just other things to ask yourself about: what am I handling? What activities am I engaging in? And who do I need to ask about this stuff? If you have a really complicated setup, again, I keep coming back to food hubs, they can be super complicated in like what activities they're doing and what size and things like that. Sometimes your state agencies might also not have all the answers, and you like talk to um, like food hub networks or things like that to really work on some collaboration and asking questions, because sometimes like food hubs have really like questions that some of these people have not heard before, and they're like, I actually don't know yet. And then one other question to ask yourself is if you are doing anything that crosses state lines. So again, like if you're sourcing food from a different state, if you are selling food across state lines, if you're transporting food across state lines, there can be different things that also activate within your regulatory framework. So just another variable to be aware of. And to be aware of if you are thinking about starting to sell into a new state, definitely do some research about what might be required before you commit to those customers across the state lines. And we can't get into it in this meeting, but lots of DOT things, Department of Transportation, especially within, but especially when you start doing transport across state lines. Okay, so third-party audits. I copied this from a different slideshow because I really liked it, but third-party audits are so in right now. They're like, everyone's like, I mean, my world at least, I feel like everyone's talking about third-party audits, and a lot of customers like are saying things about third-party audits. And I have found sometimes they don't often understand what they're asking for or why. So when I'm working with a client with a food hub and they're telling me like, oh, I need a third party audit, like I always ask them like, do you actually need one? And who's the customer that's requiring it, and what audit are they requiring? Because I think that the term third party audit is getting thrown around a lot right now, and it can be a really good and important thing to do. And there are customers that are going to require a third party audit, but I definitely recommend that unless you have a customer that is specifically requiring a third party audit, um, to start getting your baseline stuff in order first, and then you build on top of that towards a third party audit once you have specifics on what audit the customer is actually looking for, because there's a lot of different audit schemes out there. And this has happened. It can really suck if you like go get this one third party audit, and then you talk to the customer and they don't actually accept that audit and they need you to do something else. And if you had just maybe waited a little bit, you would have had that information to work backwards from to meet that customer requirement. So a lot of audit schemes, again, this could be its whole own training. So just trying with broad strokes here in a few minutes. So we talked about preventative controls rule and the produce safety rule under FSMA, and how you are regulated under FSMA is really important. And that also informs what type of audit scheme is the most appropriate fit for your operation. So often, if you are an entity that is regulated under the produce safety rule, a GAP or good agricultural practices audit would be a more appropriate audit scheme to explore. If you are an entity that is regulated under the preventative controls rule, then we've got these good manufacturing practices audit schemes that are a good fit for entities under there. And GMPs, like the word manufacturing is in the title, it is definitely developed for processors and manufacturers. There's definitely a gap right now for like distribution and food hub specific audit schemes. But again, look at your FSMA status, work backwards from there. And if you are engaging in a GMP audit and you're not manufacturing, it's okay. You're just going to have a bunch of NAs in your audit, and that's fine. Like the whole section about manufacturing just won't apply, and that's like totally fine. And the sections that do apply to your operation will apply. And then we talked a little bit about this already, but just the alignment strategy. So if you know, like, I am going to work with this customer in the next 3 years and I know they require this audit, it can be so helpful to have that information and then build your systems in that way towards the audit. And it's, it can be really helpful to think about this stuff early on. I think the next slide here, yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Food Connects. Our food hub started in response to farm to school programming. So we've always been really focused on school food and institutional sales, and we've always been a wholesale market. We never really started with a direct to consumer market, although I have worked at food hubs that do that. And we knew that we were going to pass a third party audit eventually because we wanted to work with larger institutions, and we have passed an audit. That's all set. But because we knew that, even when we were really small, when we were developing systems, we were doing things a little bit, what I'm thinking of, just like developing things a little bit further than maybe we had to at the size that we were at the time, knowing that we were going to need it and grow into it as we grew into these institutional markets. So at some points, maybe we had things like a little bit much for what we were doing at the time. But by the time we were doing the audit, we were like, oh my gosh, we're so glad we started doing that 2 years ago, because we had 2 years worth of records, and we had all this, we had time to test out these systems and really make it work. And then so we built this foundation of compliance programming and a culture around it, like a staff that we were like, no, like, we're not faking our records, we're doing these things, like, it's really important, and here's why. So we have this really good culture about compliance, that when we did get the audit request, finally we got the audit request from a customer. I mean, it still was a lot of work, but we had this great foundation where we had to tweak some things to meet the language of this specific audit, but we had been really aware of that over the years in developing our systems. So maybe this applies to you, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're working with someone who's thinking about wholesaling markets, but it can just be really helpful to have that framework from the start. And it can be also helpful the opposite direction of, I was just at a hub yesterday doing some technical assistance, and they are not interested in institutional markets and big third party audits. And it totally helped frame some of the stuff we were working on, right? Like, I could say, like, okay, like, you don't actually need to do this whole complex thing, but you do need to do this to make sure you're verifying your cold chain. But knowing that you're not targeting an audit in 3 to 5 years or whatever the time frame is, like, can also help with someone who's giving you technical assistance on your compliance programming. So yeah, I'm going to skip some of this stuff. This is just some information about Food Connects. This is our compliance outline of a lot. So these are all variables about our operation that help form our regulatory framework for our food hub. Aggregation, distribution, wholesale. We don't process, we don't manufacture. Going across state lines, fully regulated under FSMA. I'm going to speed up here because we're running out of time. And these are just some cool pictures I like to show of our operation over the last 10 years. So when I started at Food Connects, we were a $40,000 a year food hub. And then now we're at 4.5 million over the last, I mean, that was like 8 years, 8 to 9 years, including COVID growth. So I don't that was its whole own thing. But these are just some pictures over the years. So you can see this one, wish I had time. Usually I love to do like a little I Spy of compliance things here, but this was our first original cooler, bursting at the seams, building new units, developing new units, new systems in there, growing out of things, getting new equipment, pallet racking, right? So you get like a whole nother layer of pallet spaces, filling that up. Oh, that's full now. Now we have rented trailers with space as we build another unit, and just all this. This is a new area that we finished building over the last year. This is what it looked like before. Just different things. Big hole in the ground. That hole is now a big freezer. It's amazing. And I show these pictures as just part of the conversation about your compliance program developing along with your growth. Right. So a lot of things happened over, like, a lot of stuff got changed as you grow that much, not just compliance. We're talking all your operations, all your HR, all your finance, all sorts of stuff this point of this conversation is compliance, but as you grow this much, like you really do have to have in mind, because you also, as you're growing, your FSMA status changes. You can go from exempt to qualified exempt to fully regulated as you grow as an operation. So all these units are fully online now. Lots of stuff happening in this warehouse. And then, oh yeah, Carla, I'll go back to that slide at the end here. And so, the next question is like, okay, now what? Like, great, we want to do this. We don't have any of this, or we only have a little bit of it. And that's okay. Like, this is why we're having this conversation. So the next steps really are like, again, that critical question of what does your customer actually need? Try to get that information very clearly, and then do an assessment of where your operations currently are. Where are the gaps? What do you need to develop? And you can try to do that either according to your FSMA regulations if you have nothing else to go on, or you can compare it against what the customer requires. There's a lot of technical assistance out there. Sometimes the customer, that if you have a really engaged customer and they want to work with you, like they might also help pay for some of this stuff. And that does happen. I've seen it happen quite a few times where this customer is going to help split the cost of the audit, or they're going to help you buy that piece of equipment that you need. Like they really can partner with you on this if you engage with them that way. And also, it's continuous improvement. Your food safety, your compliance program is never this like static thing that's done. Anytime you add a new system or a new program, you have new staff come online. The second you write a policy or SOP, something happens that doesn't like fit in what you wrote. So you're updating things and learning things all the time. So just keeping that mindset too of like, it can be really hard if you're like, oh, I got to check everything off this list. Like it won't happen. It's just this continuous living thing that you're working with. That's part of your operation. And then supports and resources. So like I mentioned, there's lots of technical assistance out there. University extension programs often have really great support, especially for produce safety rule information. I think there's a lot for extension, specifically with produce safety rule grants. Write in a little line of funding for compliance and miscellaneous compliance related supplies, especially if you are writing a grant that has to do with institutional sales, because it's fully lined up. We want to sell to this large institutional customer. This large institutional customer has these compliance requirements. I am writing 100 hours of compliance TA into this institutional grant. And I have seen so much success with getting and sometimes you just need a little bit to like get you where you need to be. So like always keep that in the back of your mind as a thread to write into grants or project proposals or things like that, because it's a really clear connection, frankly. Like it's right there. Cost sharing with the customer, I just talked a little bit about. There's a lot of templates and tools out there. Again, I think food hubs can be a little bit more ambiguous, but if you're a food hub, you can call me and I can help you if you need help. I do a lot of TA and help with food hubs and food hub networks throughout the country. Some key takeaways here: compliance equals market access. Start early. Ask your buyer requirements. Start where you are. And I really will just start something. Like it can be so like out there in the universe and be like, oh my God, I can't do this. Like, and just do it. Like you can write a recall plan draft and try it out. None of this stuff needs to be perfect for you to start doing it, start getting records, and just like pick one thing and work on it for a little while. Then pick the next thing and work on it for a little while. If you get too bogged down in like the big thing of like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? You're never going to start any of it. And so just like start it, just start it. And then again, continuous improvement. It's never finished. It's always responsive to the growth of your operation. Then a thank you slide. I'm speed talking now, but I was trying to make sure we had time for questions, and we do still have 5 minutes. So Carla, I will go back to that slide, and then yeah, let's hear some questions if folks have them. Is that the slide you're talking about?
Yes, that one. Thank you.
Great. Yeah.
If no one else has a question, I have a question. I know I've turned the question late. I come from years back, a food marketing background. And, in large companies, their purchasing departments, their quality assurance departments, you've got the scientists tracking and running everything coming in for you. Fast forward to 2025, where recalls are prevalent for everything from refrigerated pasta dishes with
Yep.
chicken to, the ubiquitous poor romaine lettuce. God knows I love it, but, it's always under the microscope. How do you, as a small food processor, account for tracking where all of your raws have been in terms of what types of scrutiny your suppliers have put things under? Um, you know, what do you do now? Do you see what I'm saying? Because you're not a large food company. You don't have those teams.
Yeah, and you don't need them. I mean, it's really
Okay.
reflective of the size of your operation. I mean, like it is good to have someone on your team who has some awareness of these things and you
Mm-hmm.
should at a certain size, right? But if you're tracking ingredients coming in and you're a small food processor, then you don't need to like these systems don't need to be that complex. They can be as complex as you want to make them, as complex as your system is, but you can also do a lot with like numbering on your receiving tickets and lotting your ingredients, and then that lot number is tracked into the final
Okay.
product, and then that lot number is tracked one step forward into which customer that final product went to. So there's a lot to
Okay.
do with like lot numbers is one way to
Okay.
start with a traceability program and developing a recall plan around that.
Okay. So you don't have to be as precise as large manufacturers. So I think what always concerns me, and it's probably a case of having seen too much, is that the small packer has the same risk of introducing a
They do.
hazard
Yeah.
the large packer does, but they don't have the tools in place to help cut it off at the pass. But you don't want to be paralyzed um, by the fear. And I like the way you're approaching this. You see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I don't know that I agree that you need to have all the fancy tools to manage your lot numbers and like your ingredients. Like I said, like it can be fancy and it can be expensive, but it also can be a paper log where you have a numbering system of how you're receiving your ingredients and then how that number goes into a final product and then where that final product is going, and that one number can track all the way through. So it
So
is a
you take the
system you
lot
need
number
to.
rather than running it through your lab and running your own micro, is what you're saying. I got you.
Yes.
Okay.
I
Okay.
mean, and it's a lot, we're talking very broad strokes here. There are different requirements depending on what you're making and how high
Hmm.
risk of a product that is. So
Sure.
I want to be
That's true.
clear, like talking broad strokes, they don't apply to everything if it's a high risk product. But I was going to say one other thing about recalls. Oh, and if you maybe don't have like a super specific recall program, you can still do it. You just essentially, the less specific you are, the more product you have to recall. Like
Yeah,
if
that's
you
true.
don't know which exact line that bag of flour went into,
You pull
you
it
have
all
to
back.
recall all of it
Yeah.
back.
Which
Yeah.
costs you. Yeah.
So it's just something to think about, which costs you in
Okay.
different ways, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question. I know we're just at time here, so I want to give the little outro first, and then if you're able to stay on for an extra minute, McKenna.
I can stay on. Yeah, and if anyone else wants to stay on, I'm happy to stay on.
Awesome. I will pause our timer here so we don't get the little bell. But for those who do have to leave at 3, I just want to say thank you, all of you, for joining us for this session. We had 8 sessions across today, and I hope you found them helpful, insightful, and encourage you to come tomorrow to our in-person day where we'll have
Cool.
one-on-one consulting with technical assistance providers. So you can find all that information at our WebEx app. And before you go, please do complete the feedback survey in the chat. This just helps us to gather feedback on your experience during the session and continue to improve the summits that we host year over year. So your feedback is really valuable to us. And all session recordings will be made available on our YouTube channel within 2 weeks following this event. So there's also a link in the chat to subscribe to that channel. So thank you all for coming, and I'll pivot back to my question. McKenna, I run the community fund out of SIFPAC, which is our grant fund. And so I work with a lot of farmers and food business owners, food hub, folks who are starting food hubs or trying to grow food hubs. And a lot of them are looking for technical assistance. So was just wondering if you could talk through how it would look like if a grower comes to me and says, hey, I want to get into these institutional markets, and I want to send them to you for technical assistance. Is this a paid service? Is it one-on-ones? Is it workshops or webinars like this? Like, what does it kind of look like
Yeah,
for
I
you to work
mean,
with someone?
I do a lot of different stuff depending on what the ask is. Like I totally do one-on-ones, especially if it's like we're prepping for an audit or we need to, like we'll do more of a one-on-one, like really in the weeds about that specific operation. I also do a lot of group trainings and webinars. So if there was like, if you had a bulk of people that were like, hey, we really want to learn about recall plans, like we could do a recall plan training, we could do a recall plan webinar, with the opportunity for one-on-ones. I mean, that's another really good thing to build into grants, especially if you're facilitating any type of technical assistance programming or like network holders or, some things like that. Like doing the group trainings and webinars is so helpful because people often have the same questions and like learn off of each other and weave off of each other in these trainings. And then like I have found it really nice to do a group training, and then if there's funding, like if we can get group funding, we do group trainings, and then we can do one-offs for deeper dives on like specifics to that operation. But yeah, I guess a long-winded way of saying like I've done every single one of those like setups that you just mentioned in different ways. Um, and yeah, the funding, you can really like, where's the funding coming from and how do we write that in? Some Food Connects has some funding depending on where the operation's located and what specific thing they're working on. Like we've got some funding to work on organic certifications. If that was something you as a food hub are realizing, oh, I really need to go do that after this presentation. And that's through a USDA program. So like there's different buckets and different options for sure. And I'd love to talk more about that if that's something you're interested in or you have folks coming to you with questions that you think would be a fit.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll send you an email.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you have time for one more question,
Yeah, sure.
I have a question. So I'm working on I work for a national organization, and one of our priorities around getting more organic food into like schools, for example, and other
Okay.
public institutional markets. And so I'm just curious because I see you have it on here. And I'm assuming that maybe not all the stuff that you're selling is organic, just because
No.
that would be very rare. But so I guess my
Mhm.
question is like, where's the driver for that? Is it that you have farms that are growing organic and then you're looking to help find places to sell the
For
organic
the
produce?
drive for what? For
Or
us,
having
for Food
organic?
Connects,
Is it coming from
we
the
are
farms
required
that
to
are
be.
producing or the buyers that are
No, like we as a distributor who sells organic is required to be or sort of, so the regulations around organic changed last year. And I mean, we want to sell organic product. Like we're not like we sell organic product. We work with organic vendors. We have customers that want organic products. Just as a distributor, like, yeah, we have organic products. We're not like only selling organic or really focused on it. It's just like a very natural part of our product offerings. um, and with the way the National Organic Program, there were updates to that whole regulation last year called the Strengthening Organic Enforcement Act or something like that, that essentially removed exemptions for distributors. And pretty much if I, as a distributor, am selling certified organic product, I need to be certified organic. So
Mm, I
we
see.
wouldn't have gotten an organic certificate. I mean, there's requirements of how to handle organic product, whether you're certified or not. But we as a distributor would not have gotten certified organic, but we were required to, and the agencies were telling us we had to do it, and we did it, and it was fun. And we did a whole, KP, about your question about group trainings, we did a whole like cohort of all the food hubs in Vermont, worked together, did their inspections, like not together, but we all learned about it together. And we had this big mentorship program that's been replicated in other states now. And that's where some of our funding comes from, to help other food hubs get certified organic. Yeah, it's been like a really fun project. But again, long-winded way of saying, like, we wouldn't have actually gotten certified, but we literally had to continue to sell organic products, which we wanted to.
Okay.
It's a big part of our catalog.
Yeah, and that's really helpful to understanding
Yeah.
what some of our barriers may be into getting more organic products in institutional markets. It could, yes,
Yeah.
okay. This is
And that
eye-opening.
distributor probably needs to be certified organic. Yeah.
Great. All right, thank you.
Email me if you
I
want to
got
talk
your
more. I've
email
done a
and
lot of
follow up.
organic technical assistance over the last year.
Oh, awesome. Okay, I'll definitely
Yeah.
reach out. Thank you.
Great.